Book 1, Dacheldor.
To live without dying, when you are one who should live several lives, is the ultimate punishment.
Grand Imperator Malik. The history of the Strider Empire. Originating in the early ages of the cosmos, the Striders were among the first races of mortals to exist. With slender bodies and pointed ears, some could confuse them for elves, but the horns sprouting from their skull and deep red orbs filling the entirety of their eye sockets suggested otherwise. Their gray skin and black blood provided further proof of a far different evolution of being, and their sharp teeth indicated a cannibalistic species. This was no race born of love or mysticism. The Striders were born of the darkness. Their homeworld was a volcanic wasteland. The air was filled with ash so thick that it blocked the sun, and the black rocks of the planet were formed and reformed by hardened magma. The sulfur in the air forced all inhabitants to wear large black scarves embedded into their outfits, and the only animals that inhabited the planet beyond the Striders themselves were the volcano-dwelling worms that spun black silk for Strider clothing. This world was considered uninhabitable to most beings, but the Striders had evolved to flourish there. Since moss was the only plant life that grew, and the Striders dared not kill the worms that provided silk, meat was a delicacy, and no dead Strider went to waste. Metal was extremely rare and was used only to create buckles and insignias, while weapons were made out of hardened stone. Clothing was sewn from black silk, and good boots were woven from the skin of fallen enemies. Despite having nothing around to provide life, the Striders found a way, even if it required slaughtering one another for survival. Evolution also aided the Striders' survival mostly in the form of advanced eyes. Though they had the ability to see into the color spectrum much like humans, life on the dark planet caused a rare mutation that allowed them to see into something they called the spectral spectrum. Striders could see energy signatures and power fluctuations, granting them a night vision beyond that of other species. Their eyes were also completely open, their pupil covering the entire eye. It was said they looked as though they had gaping holes where their eyes should be, with dark red light pouring from the openings. In addition to their already frightful appearance, Striders commanded great power over matter. Deep inside their subconscious, they understood the weaving of the universe. Though they could not access this information consciously, they were able to use it to bind mathematics and theory to physical alteration. By understanding the equations ruling an object's movement, they were able to alter it. By understanding the atomic makeup of an object, they were able to transform it. And by memorizing complex equations in relation to various concepts and possibilities, they were able to create and control energy. They referred to this ability as magic, but it was more of a science than a mystical art. Through the use of magic, Striders could manipulate their planet's rocks to form shelters and buildings. They could alter the flow of magma and energy to heat or cool their habitat. They could embed runes upon stone weapons to make them harder than steel. They could even conjure flame or electricity to strike down anything in their way. Thus, the Striders were well known as a warlike race that harnessed a strong control over both magic and death. Races from other planets left them alone, and Strider society evolved without outside interference for thousands of years. At first, they were split into clans that constantly fought for power, but over time, these were replaced by schools, specializing in the advancement of magic and concept. These schools continued to fight as the clans had, but were more organized and communal within their own walls. Eventually, members of a given school lived inside a single building spanning miles, and no Strider possessed his or her own habitat or property. Their homeworld was covered with large schools housing thousands of Strider devotees in each, all battling to be the best. This was the way of the Striders until one day an alien vessel crash-landed on their world. History does not record what happened to the vessel's owners, but it is known that the school called House of the Worm confiscated the vessel. Members of the House of the Worm used it to travel to a nearby planet where they discovered other life forms and technology that could grant them greater access to space. They attempted to trade with the life forms, but when this failed, they attacked and stole their technology. This sparked a full-scale retaliatory attack against the Strider homeworld by the other race and several of their allies. With little chance of survival on their own, the schools of the Strider homeworld banded to form the Grand Council, comprised of one member from each school and one chosen Lord Clanmaster to preside over them. The Grand Council was given the power to command all schools in unison during times of war. They were also granted the ability to declare law that dictated internal war between schools during times of peace. Through an act of retribution against the House of the Worm, an unwitting alien species had united the most feared race in the galaxy, and soon fell by its hands. After a few centuries, the entire Strider race replaced its need to battle one another with a desire to conquer others. Under the rule of the Grand Council, the Striders conquered 37 planets, crushing all their adversaries. With access to greater resources, they became a superpower within the universe, able to threaten any species or planet of their choosing. Additionally, physical magic used on their eyes forced an evolutionary change, allowing them to see in even the brightest sunlight. There was nothing to stop the Strider Empire from taking whatever they wanted, or so it seemed. The Strider Messiah. The union of the schools ushered in a time known as the Era of the Striders. This is when the Nameless One took on his first host, a young Strider named Dacheldor. Although born with the soul of an ancient, he had no knowledge of his origins and thus had no idea he was anything more than a mere Strider. In the early days, he only ever wanted what all Striders wanted: power. Like most Striders, he never knew his parents. He was born into the House of the Reaper, a school on the Strider homeworld which trained the primary Strider military defenses, and was raised as a combat mage. From the House of the Reaper, he was trained in military tactics, explosive spellcasting, and all forms of combat. He was given a stone Vesabenis, longsword, enchanted with the blood of Striders to make it stronger than any metal, and was garbed in the traditional Strider combat mage uniform, a black bodysuit worn under long black pants and a thick black coat resembling an old English riding jacket, closed in the front with metal buckles and house insignias. Unlike others of his race, Dacheldor's horns were only 1.5 inches long, and he had only 6. The first pair was located 2 inches above the eyebrows at the far ends of his forehead. The second was 1 inch behind the first. The final pair was 1 inch behind the second. They called this layout of horns the crown, but most Striders born with it had horns at least twice the length of Dacheldor's and had about twice as many. He also had unique physical features which set him apart from the rest of his race. Striders were usually born with either white or black hair, but his was a sprinkled mix of the two. His skin was considered light, as it was almost pale with a grayish hue, and when he grew to adulthood he stood 7 feet tall by Earth measurement, which was considered tall even for Striders. Other aspects of his appearance were normal by Strider standards. He had the same pointed ears and physical build as other Striders, and his eyes were the same glowing blood red as others of his race. He was in his own way both extraordinary and average in appearance, but his intellect was what set him above all other Striders. By the time he reached the Strider equivalent of his teenage years, Dacheldor had already become the strongest member of his house. Not only had he mastered all the teachings of the House of the Reaper, a feat most Striders could not achieve in their lifetime, he had also managed to use the school's governmental status to access the teachings of other schools. He spent his free time creating new spells and equations based on combinations of his training, and before even seeing his first war, he was deemed a prodigy and the youngest Strider to ever master all that a school had to teach. Shortly after the completion of his training, he was ready for his first military assignment. Most combat mages were kept close to the school until their adolescent years were over, but Dacheldor had already surpassed the level of training most Striders were able to achieve in a lifetime. Because he was such a unique case, the headmasters of his school took his desires into consideration when selecting his placement. What he asked for, however, was not something handed to just anyone. He wanted to leave the planet. He dreamed of visiting alien worlds out of a desire to learn the tactics and combat of others. Such assignments were readily available to ambassadors and people of high rank, but rarely to those as young as Dacheldor. The headmasters had witnessed his genius and felt that he may be able to do the House of the Reaper some good on such an assignment, but they also considered it a risky decision that could negatively affect their future political careers. So, in order to avoid possible public humiliation, they decided to send Dacheldor to the Oracle, a priestess of the House of the Reaper believed to have divine knowledge of the future, in order to discern if such an assignment was wise. All Striders feared the Oracle's judgment, because the title and position chosen by her stuck with a Strider forever. If the Oracle said you were a garbage collector, you did that for life. If she said you were a council member, you were elected the next year. Her word could sway the entire life of any member of Strider society. It was Dacheldor's desire to see the universe and to one day become a part of the Grand Council. Seeing the Oracle so early in life was a risk, but one that would eventually come anyway. When he stood before the Oracle, he felt confident that he could handle whatever title she bestowed upon him. He was wrong, however, never imagining the title she would place upon his young shoulders. Messiah. Even to a Strider as ambitious as Dacheldor, the title of Messiah was too heavy. Religious prophecy has stated that in the end of days a Messiah would come, born a Strider, but with the spirit of the Strider god. It was believed that he would unite the schools completely and produce a singular purpose in the minds of all Striders, a purpose that would elevate them to godhood. Dacheldor had never believed in the ancient prophecies or in the Strider god. He had always believed that the Striders' worship of an ancient named Shock was foolish and based on fractured mythology. Now he was proclaimed to be the reincarnation of Shock, a being he did not believe had ever existed. It was too much for him to fathom at such a young age, and too much pressure for him to bear alone. Regardless of his lack of faith, the others around him believed what the oracle said, and he was granted priest-like status amongst his people. To them, he was the Messiah who would one day lead them to godliness. He was the reincarnation of their ancient god. Little did he realize that deep within him dwelled the soul of an ancient, the one who had first created the Strider homeworld. The prophecies were true, and his title was not a lie, no matter how badly he wished it would all go away. Using his new title to manipulate the leaders of his house, he managed to procure an assignment off-world. He did not travel as a combat mage to a military outpost, though. He traveled as an ambassador for the Strider race. He would be the first Strider to join the Galactic Federation, a council of races that fought to maintain a balance of power between the galaxies. It was his job to assess the possibility of universal conquest for his people. He was to determine if the Federation could be easily destroyed. During his time in the Federation, Dacheldor saw worlds in colors he could never have imagined. Brilliant scenery, the likes of which his homeworld could never achieve, changed the heart of the young Strider, filling him with a desire to know more about the universe. In his reports, he urged the Council to ally with the races of the universe rather than enslave them, but he knew they never took his reports seriously. Secretly, he did not care what they thought. He felt closer to the beings he met off-world than to his own people. When he was forced to return home, he brought technology and medicines from alien races. Most of the Striders viewed these as useless, and, in the end, only one artifact was seen as valuable, a weapon called the Bolt Slinger. Similar to the pistols of Earth, the Bolt Slinger hurled a deadly projectile at high speed using only a mixture of powders and a spark. Unlike the spells of the Striders, bolts or bullets fired from the Bolt Slingers could not be detected by Strider eyes. They were seen as a new way to fight from a distance when an opponent was too wary of magic. In spite of Dacheldor's desire for coexistence, the Council continued to prepare for war with the Galactic Federation. The new Lord Clan Master, Malik, did not see any value in what the species of the other worlds had to offer. He desired only their mineral resources and their manpower as slaves. Viewing it as his duty to enforce his views of peace, Dacheldor ran for the position of Grand Council member for the House of the Reaper, and was elected by a landslide. He was the youngest Strider to ever become a member of the Grand Council, but he also became the biggest target for assassination attempts in Strider history. Life on the Council changed him, and in his efforts to thwart his own assassinations, Dacheldor was forced to assassinate several other Council members. Though his skill as a combat mage had never been used on the battlefield, it is a known fact that he slaughtered countless would-be assassins while a member of the Grand Council. He even publicly executed those he caught alive, burning them to death after nailing them to giant stone slabs placed in the shape of an X. This earned him the respect and love of many Striders, but also the hatred of many more. By the Strider equivalent of his mid-20s, he had become the most controversial Strider counselor of all time. Within the halls of the Council, he was viewed as an outsider, yet he commanded a cult following of Striders from outside the political office. A thorn in the side of universal conquest, he became Malik's primary adversary, and Malik soon decided he would have to be dealt with permanently.